Security is something that is pretty much on the news, I would say, and it has a lot of challenges, and there's a thin line between we are working on the name of our nation and our security, and later on we'll see more examples on that, or you're breaching the privacy and having some very challenging, I would say, private issues, and where is the balance? So we will try to face that in the next couple of minutes, and in the next, they said that I need to shortcut this, this session for about 10 minutes, but I'm gonna keep working until it's gonna be not that interesting. So you should give me some feedback, otherwise we're gonna cut short. But with us, we have Heigo Shadow, and he's from Takushoku. I'm hoping I'm saying it correctly. Takushoku University in Tokyo, Japan, and he's doing a lot of research on the government, the defense industry, how the relationship should work together, and of course he will present himself later on. We've got Megan Lampert, and she's based in Washington, D.C., and she's a researcher, and she was having her studies in Houston, Bush, in Texas. Perfect. We have also Oluwafemi, or Femi, as he wants us to call him. And Femi is an ethical hacker who has a long history with research, and he published more than 30 different research papers. So I'm sure we will be more than happy to hear his point of view on different issues, and it's coming from Nigeria. And it's interesting to learn more about their perspective. We have Lydia. Lydia is originally from Florida and now in Berlin. And she is a researcher on warfare and emerging technology, of course. And we've got Cenk Sidar, originally from Turkey, now based in Washington, D.C. He's the CEO of Global Wonks, very interesting company based on network of more than 2,400 different experts on 140 different countries. And I'll be more than happy to learn of what Cenk has to say. In that sense, by the way, we will try to take the definition of national security a bit broader, not just on the defense industry and just focusing on wars or stuff like that, but we were talking about the stability in that sense. So if it's okay, Lydia, I'd be happy to start with you and to get your point of view on, first, when we're talking about this kind of debate, what is the debate we're talking about? We talked a little bit about the privacy, about that. First, let's define what are we talking about?
Well, I think one good way to start is understand that with each new technology, we have to realize that it will be used across industries. And that also means the military industry as well as law enforcement. When it comes to privacy, it means that we have to revisit what privacy means to us in the context of the contemporary technologies that are in our lives. And I think one example that we should look at is GDPR, which is really a perfect example of how Europe has responded to the new technologies of social media, the data collection, and how they felt they could create norms that reflect their values in today's context. And I think if we think about then law enforcement or technologies that are used for surveillance for law enforcement purposes, then we can think maybe there's a possibility for us to co-create, have a dialogue around where is it okay to monitor and take away some of our privacy for the greater security good, and where can we find a way to maybe use GDPR, let's say for security, or some of the tools from it, not exactly copy-paste, as well as the right to forget. I think that there's some valid arguments behind that can also be used, but I really think there needs to be a dialogue.
Sure. Thank you so much. And in that sense, Megan, can you tell us a little bit more from your research on that kind of balance or thin line?
Yeah, absolutely. Building off of Lydia's comments, I think to narrow it a bit, to just looking at facial recognition software, a technology that's becoming more and more ubiquitous in our society every day. It's used for mundane things like unlocking our cell phone, but it's used at sporting events and concert venues. It was reported late last year that Taylor Swift was using it at her concerts to like screen out stalkers, which I thought was really fascinating. So I think it's important to distinguish between legitimate uses of a technology, whatever it may be, in this case facial recognition, versus uses that are inappropriate that could infringe on our civil liberties. And this ties back, I think, into the conversation we had yesterday about trust in technology, particularly Sanjo Yoshi's comments about the importance of context, that we have to look at these technologies in a much broader tech ecosystem. Because when used appropriately, facial recognition software has a lot of beneficial uses. For example, law enforcement in the wake of a horrific mass shooting in Maryland last year used it to identify the shooter. It's been used at airports to catch imposters traveling on false passports. But that being said, it's also being used for a lot of inappropriate uses. And there's some real problems with algorithmic biases, looking at racial and gender biases that are being used in the algorithms that are in place today. There's also a really high rate of false positives. It was reported in the UK that facial recognition wrongly identified like members of the public as potential criminals 96% of the time. 96, like that's a lot. And so there's these issues that are obviously crucially important. So thinking back to this balancing act between collective security, like our desire for public safety, versus each of our desires for our individual freedoms, there's a few ways you can take it in the facial recognition debate. San Francisco, for instance, has banned the technology outright for government and police use. Some have said that's taken it too far and have suggested like a moratorium on the technology instead, that we're not going to ban it, but we need time to think through algorithmic biases and through public consent about how data is collected, how it's shared with other entities, or how long it's gathered and kept.
Sure.
So I think there's some real issues just in this singular technology that we have to work through as it's being more and more widespread, like adopted in our communities.
Yeah, thank you for that. And on that sense, when we're talking about facial recognition, and I'm sure, as a father of 3 kids, and we were kind of debating these issues, if I knew that there are some, rapists out there in the playground, and I want the local enforcement forces to make sure that they are protected. So if we're taking that even to the national example, if those guys are in the airports, or if those guys are somewhere out there and they're gonna blow out themselves, I would like to use that technology, and I don't think there's any debate around it, and I'll be happy to listen to some of the questions. Yeah, maybe Prasad.
So I think when you talk about defense, it's not just about the geographical territory. Just to pick up on what Shay is saying, the difference is probably in different aspects of life, like the pedophiles. How do you defend that? And similarly, the financial terrorists and regular terrorists. And there are other kinds of predators all across the world. So I would be more interested, it would be more provocative to understand this problem and broaden the definition of defense, not just the defense of territorial places or whatever, geographies or countries, etc. It should be more like the aspects of life. What do you think about that, and how can we defend that?
Yeah. Would you like to respond, Lydia? Sorry.
So I think if you brought up pedophiles, I met somebody who works in law enforcement in dealing with that, and that's actually a very challenging job for a human to do. And they have to go through desensitization training before they can even start to look at the images, because that can do quite a bit of psychological damage to have to see that day in and day out. So before they can start working with that material, they have to go through a lengthy desensitization process. And besides that, they are required to visit psychiatrists and psychologists every few months to to have an evaluation. And they don't actually last long. The turnover for people who deal with this is very high. And that's a problem because they've have all this experience and then they leave because it's hard to deal with. And so facial recognition technology has actually created an opportunity for humans to remove themselves a little bit from it by being able to, and artificial intelligence, so being able to look at many images and identify this is pedophilic in nature, for example. I don't know if that we're there yet where humans can be completely taken away from that examination process, but there are technologies that are coming about to try and help minimize the psychological damage of the people who are working with that data and the impact that it can have. So that's one on pedophilia that I thought you might be interested in.
Thanks, Lydia. And Femi, if we're talking about nation security in that aspect, I'll be happy if you could share a little bit. Is it working for you? Just need to push the button? Perfect. And I'd be happy if you could share a little bit more from the Nigerian aspect and your experience in that field about, the balance between this nation's security and the freedom or whatever you have.
For example, for us in Nigeria, some of the challenges, from a technical point of view, I'm not in support of lethal autonomous weapon system because I feel that humans must continue to retain control over these weapons and also be legally responsible for their decisions to use those weapons. However, I'm thinking of, instead of those that are lethal, why not we consider semi-autonomous systems that are non-lethal? For example, we have our challenges in Africa. Particularly in Nigeria, we've been having the challenge of kidnapping. You hear of not only kidnapping, pipeline vandalization, and there are guys that are seriously making money from these ventures. And it's so prevalent in the country, especially kidnapping, now that almost on a daily basis, there are roads that you cannot pass. It's so funny to learn that even military, heads of military outfits, for example, let me give you an example. You want to travel from Abuja to Kaduna. Most of these military men, they live in Kaduna. It's just about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. They live in Kaduna. They have families in Kaduna, but they work in Abuja because Abuja is the Federal Capital Territory. But you won't believe that a lot of them are afraid to take that route, that they have to go through the rail. I'm talking of heads of military, because the level of kidnapping is so much. So I'm thinking of why not we deploy technologies, weapons, but not lethal, that can help in mitigating this risk. For example, I was discussing with somebody and he was talking about how about introducing belts that have sensors, and if you are kidnapped, you just activate the sensor, and somebody somewhere, the security agency, get to know about it. They release these robots, which responds to the sensors and traces the kidnappers then, and the rest of them. It could be like a drone, kind of, and spray tear gas or whatever it is. And we're looking, those are the things I think we should be talking about, the application I feel that we need in Africa, especially in Nigeria. Also, I think it can also be applied for pipeline vandalization. I learned that something like that is already existing, where sensors are embedded into the pipelines, and somebody who wants to vandalize, an alarm is triggered, and the drone comes and deters.
Okay, thanks, Femi. And Cenk, if you don't mind jumping in, when we are talking about those kind of risks, and when we are talking about that, can you share your kind of experience in that sense?
Sure, Shay, thank you. So when we talk about national security, we all think about autonomous weapons, like predictive analytics or facial recognition or more all the sexy technologies. But actually, I'm personally very passionate about the future of work and how emerging technologies accelerate changes in the nature of jobs, and how how the changes in nature of job will impact the security of different societies and nations is a very important concern for the next few decades, because again countries may be competing for 5G, you know, like leadership in the AI or other areas. But if you can't put your society together, and if you don't have social cohesion, social stability in your country, that doesn't mean anything. So I think what is the major security risk to China is probably, you know, to keep the, you know, the social stability together for next, you know, 10, 15 years, more than any other, like a warfare threat. So when we look at, for example, Syria, you know, the country didn't collapse because of an attack by a neighboring country. It collapsed because the climate change created a drought in the country, and the agriculture production went down, and many Syrian villagers in the country basically couldn't make their living, and the country, the Syrian government didn't really take the necessary measures to keep the, you know, society together and to provide opportunities for people. We are, in a macro scale, we are experiencing a similar situation because I think 40% of the jobs will be automated, you know, like in mostly repetitive, most of the jobs that requiring repetitive tasks, such as, you know, like driving car, like checking out, you know, groceries at the supermarket. You know, once, and those people that working at their jobs are more vulnerable to potential job losses because, you know, they're more like lower paying jobs, and, you know, like these people are dependent on this income. And once, you know, I don't know if you live in a Western country, you see less and less cashiers working at the supermarket and more self-checkout tools. And there are a lot of buzz about, you know, like driverless cars. We don't know when it's going to be a reality in 3, 5, 10 years. But, you know, when, you know, that becomes a reality and there's a shift in paradigm, so what will all these, you know, Uber drivers will be doing next 5, 10 years, you know, how they're going to earn their income. So when we talk about national security, I think we should also talk about how government will, you know, address those issues. Universal basic income is an important, like, you know, like a topic in global macro field. So how, you know, also interestingly, all these companies automating jobs, including Amazon, Google, they're also probably they also will be favoring policies towards UBI because, you know, I mean, if you don't have your consumer, you know, stable, so you're not going to be able to, you know, like perform in this market. So future work, I think, is a major, you know, paradigm change in society, and it will have some serious impacts on the security of nations, also in a global scale that will also impact probably the, you know, the geopolitical landscape as well.
Sure, thanks, Cenk. So if we are talking about this kind of stability or security or the place or the position of the government there, Edo, I'll be happy to get your kind of, from your experience, about how the government and the public plays together and some of the research you've done.
Thank you very much, Shay. I think the emerging technology is about a possibility of the welfare of the future society. And I think there are many positive possibilities in terms of security, safety, and especially about law enforcement. And the same possibilities also looked at by the military sphere. And they, not exclusively, but mostly focus on the national security affairs. So they are interested in those emerging technologies, or they are interested in including those technology into their weapon system. So the possibility of emerging technology have many, you know, expectation among broad range of public, both in private and public, but the implication of which is totally different from each other. And I think as Femi, if I'm pronouncing correct, Femi, you talked about the protection of pipelines. I think the drone technologies and the land-based drone technologies are already in use. And the border protection technologies are placed in many countries, including Israel and South Korea. And undersea drones technology are to be cultivated, especially in sea-locked countries like Japan. And there are many aspects in technology as well. But the problem is that how can we decrease or lessen the impact of those technology in the national security affair when it is used for the not good purposes?
Yeah,
I should
exactly.
say. And in that regard, I think the...
And can you give us the example, I mean, between that kind of balances between not good purposes versus for the national security?
The debate, I think, which are going on at this moment, I think it will provide you with some example, is the debate in the CCW, Certain Conventional Weapon System. And we are talking about the lethal autonomous weapon system and how the technology involved within the lethal autonomous weapon system is good for the society as well as bad for the countries, especially with regard to AI and robotics, and those are the issues which we are talking about. And the private sector would argue that the AI will bring the perfect opportunity for everyone, but at the same time, it will have a criticism that the AI would bring about some sort of Terminator or micro drones and swarm technology, which is become famous after the film called by the Future Life Institute.
Yeah, I agree. That's interesting. And you know, when you're talking about the balance between private industry and the government and all that, let me share one kind of war story from my kind of past life experience. And you know, when I was part of the Air Force back then, and when we've just joined, I'm talking about the year of 1990. So we were talking about a cycle, and I was, you know, with all my scenes, I was born and raised in Israel. And we had back then a lot of missiles coming from Gaza Strip into different cities and places. And the cycle between the time that there was a missile shooting from Gaza Strip into, let's say, Tel Aviv, it was more than 22 minutes to identify the source. We had like more than 6, 7 different systems until we got the specific locations from where that missile was was shooting, and we had either a helicopter or whatever trying to mitigate that risk. I'm not sure how familiar are you with now with the automatic systems and, I'm sorry? And right now with that, we had kind of wrapped up this cycle for less than 12 seconds. So 12 seconds since a missile has been shot to the time that you know exactly from where it's been shot, and there's an automatic drone that could eliminate that risk. So do you think in that kind of sense, is there a debate? Is there something that we should kind of strengthen up some of the, and I know, Lydia, we were talking a little bit about the UN regulation and the 5 criteria. Can you elaborate on that from your perspective?
Well, that wasn't necessarily applicable to this context. I think, though, a recent example also in Israel might be relevant here. Just a few weeks ago, Israel responded to a cyber attack with kinetic force, and it was against Hamas, who had launched a cyber attack against them. And this is an example, a first example that we know now that a cyber attack has been met with a physical response. Now, I do think that it's important to see this in the context of the Israel and Hamas conflict. However, I think that it offers us an opportunity to think about when are we happy for a kinetic attack to follow a cyber attack. And I think that one of the challenges with cyber warfare and cyber conflict is that a lot of the intentions and a lot of the weapons inside cyberspace are shrouded in secrecy, and for very good reason. However, I think now is a great opportunity to take this incident and say, what does that mean for me? What happens if it happened in my country? Even though that this is, you know, a separate context, but to think about that and have a conversation internationally about that. So, yeah, I think that's a good point to mention to what you said.
Let's do a quick stop here. Anybody from the audience would like to to have a question for the panel, or yes, please. Just please mention your name and from where you come from.
My name is Ankit. I'm from India. I have a very basic question. I know you guys are pretty advanced in these subjects, so pardon my ignorance, but I'm trying to understand from this panel, from what we understood yesterday, how internet and social media platforms are being weaponized to radicalize disenfranchised youth in multiple countries across the world. What are 3 or 4 top threats when it comes to weaponization of emerging technologies by bad actors? I would love to hear that, and in what way can these threats be managed or tackled or responded to?
Thank you. Please, Megan.
That's a really great question. I would say one technology that automatically comes to mind is deepfakes, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. These are realistic video and audio recordings that use AI to manipulate original source material to make it appear that someone says or does something that they actually don't. This is a widely available technology, and it's imperfect right now, but I could get my phone and download an app called Fake App and make a deep fake on my own that's like fairly realistic. And some uses are beneficial, and like some are really funny. I'm sure a lot of you have seen like the video of the comedian Jordan Peele combining like his voice and face with President Barack Obama's. But there's also a legitimate fear that deepfakes can be used to disrupt elections, to harm diplomatic relations or incite violence. Some of the worst case scenarios are like a head of state saying like, I've just launched a nuclear weapon, or of a video coming out of a presidential candidate the day before an election saying something or doing something really provocative. To answer the question of what we can do about it, I think there's mechanisms that the government, that the tech industry, and that civil society can all play. I think on the government and industry side, there's already a lot of like government agencies and research organizations that are researching ways to implement like automatic detection software, so that if I were to upload a video that's been manipulated, it would be obvious to the viewer. It would either have like an X or it would have a check if it's like verified true. That's still in development, but there's still like some early testing that's promising. But technological solutions are not enough. So I think there's ways that the government can respond, either through like regulation and legislation of social media companies, and like trying to limit the amount of manipulated information that's posted and then that is allowed to stay online. I think an example of that is there was a video that came out, a manipulated video of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and it was made to look like that she was drunk. And Facebook came back and said, like, yes, we know it's false, but we're not going to remove it from the platform. So I think we'll see responses in that in the coming months. And finally, and I think the most critical but really challenging piece is this idea of digital resilience and like tech literacy in our communities. And I think we're beginning to work through that, but we also can't treat communities as monoliths. Like, communities are made up of very different demographic groups and different age groups, and each person takes in information through different mediums. And we're all susceptible to different forms of misinformation, but I think that's a critical piece that we've talked about a lot the past 2 days, but that government and industry and civil society groups will all play a role in helping do that.
Sure, thanks, Megan. Anyone else from the panel? Maybe you would like to?
Okay, I'm thinking also, what I would say is another top threat is the use of what you call them autonomous systems. You apply them on social media. I know internet trolls, they do some of these things to spread, disinform the people, fake news. Currently, there's a research ongoing by myself and 3 of my friends. In Nigeria, we just held some elections in 2009. That was in, I think, March. And some of the WhatsApp platforms I belong to, I noticed a lot of fake news were being spread. And so I felt that, no, this could impact on the results. And so we're carrying out a research, which is still ongoing, We're looking at the effect, propagation, and the impact of fake news and hate speech on the 2019 general elections. We're still gathering data, but so far from what we've gathered, preliminary findings are you see people threatening on the basis of news spread, people threatening on the basis of religion, the basis of ethnicity, and a couple of people confessed that they were actually, those fake news and hate speeches influence their perception of some candidates. So those are some of the challenges we have in now, where people are using automatic systems automated systems, to influence people's perception.
Heigo, do you have anything to add?
To add a little point to the previous two comments is that in the democratic state of democracy, the very most effective or most dangerous weapons within the democracy is the disinformation and misinformation. Those would mobilize the people, and mobilize, if it's in a good direction, it's good, but if it's mobilized into the bad direction, that will create the most vicious effects on the society itself. So not just putting this type of technology can do this destruction or killing, but we have to realize that, especially with regard to the information, we have to be careful about the quality and of the information, and we have to verify. And how to verify? Education, yes, but there should be another way, or we have to be considering some other method or mechanism through which to verify the quality of the information.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Heigo. I don't see Anindo here. Anindo is not here in the audience. Yeah, I'd like to, I wanted to raise and to kind of maybe ask the panel later on, but from the researchers you're doing and the research you were having or any kind of experience, maybe Cenk, from your experience and the different questions you're getting out there, is there any kind of strength or fears or risks about robotics and how they are getting into that field? Anything from your kind of experience, if you have any?
Not specifically, but I would like to mention, I think maybe the audience doesn't know. Basically, we have a platform, algorithm-driven platform connecting experts with businesses and other, financial investors. So we get a lot of real-time questions from clients through our automated system, so the experts answer that. So we're getting a lot of questions these days. We call them network pulses on 5G technology, from the geopolitical and the commercial perspective. Of course, AI ethics, has been a growing trend. But from the security perspective, I don't have a specific example to give. But I was going to add one point earlier, so it's not relevant to your question, but I want to mention it. When I talk about future at work, I realized I sounded too pessimistic. So, and yes, the job automation has been a serious concern, and yes, many jobs will be replaced, but the whole, future of work is more than job automation, right? So the communication technologies that we've been witnessing last decade enabled, also empowered a lot of people to earn income without needing to go to 9-to-5 jobs. So this is also like a serious opportunity for income equality globally, because, for instance, I want to give you an example. So if you're an analyst on India, Turkey, Mexico, China, you had very limited job opportunities working for a couple consulting firm, Big Four, or a couple top-notch political risk firms, and you work for 9-to-5. You cover all this issues related to your country or sector. But thanks to the platforms like ours, Global Wonks, we have about 2,500 people globally based, and they're earning similar amount of income working in any part of the world rather than just working for one company. And they set their flexible times, so they have their own schedules. A lot of women in emerging markets, are able to continue to be part of the workforce, even if they, prefer to spend more time with their kids, or for stay-home dads, for stay-home moms. So future of work is a good thing. So it's not only a threat, but also opportunity. But the concern here is how governments will address those paradigm changes. So, for instance, many people don't go freelancing in the US because if you go to freelancing, you may not have the health insurance, because it's very expensive to get health insurance independently. So how some governments, starting with the United States government, where I'm, from in DC, so how to provide affordable health insurance so people don't need to have a 9-to-5 job, but they can do what they want and when they want, freelance on their specific niche areas, and can still have a, social they're still going to be under the social security umbrella. So this is a major concern, how to provide health insurance. Actually, like platforms like Uber, for example. Let me give you another gig economy example, Uber. Uber cannot, so Uber should go ahead and probably provide health insurance to Uber drivers, but they call them contractors, not employees, right? So they're not obliged to provide health insurance. And so those issues are, I think, the issues of, today, not tomorrow. We need to address those issues to fully, to provide this, transformation of the workforce in 21st century.
Thank you, Cenk. Any other questions from the audience that you would like to share with us before we'll go to the kind of final comments, final remarks? I learned I need to count to 10, so I'm going to do it. Yeah, I guess that's the dessert. Guys, from your perspective, any kind of final comments? Where do you think we're going to see governments and public sectors, and maybe more about privacy in that aspect? Heigo, anything from you?
Yeah. Before having the last comments here, may I add some thing about robotics? As you know, Japan experienced a great tsunami in the earthquake, and Fukushima nuclear power plants that broke down. And we know that there are many radiation there, so we wanted to bring in the robotics of our production into the Fukushima, but we failed to do that because we did not develop the robotics for that specific purposes. But so the France, US brought in the robotics, and we made some management of the disaster itself. So there we find out that the robotics is one of the fields which we have to develop. But at the same time, there are strong criticism among the public that robotics might lead into some sort of Terminator type of thing. So there are still debates over there. But unless those serious accidents would occur, there should not be such a extensive debate. So I think that will provide you some example about the current debate which is going on. And with regard to the government public-private cooperation, I think in the field of emerging technology, I think the private industry have an edge. So in that regard, private-public cooperation is necessary, collaboration is necessary, but that does not mean that private must cooperate with governments. But the government would like private to cooperate with them. So those tensions are always there within the government, within the private, and we have to sort out and reach the best possible result which we can expect.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much. Megan?
Thanks, Shay. On this piece of how we can draw, or if we can draw red lines when deploying this emerging technology, I'm probably saying the obvious, but this is really hard. And there's for a multitude of reasons, but I want to highlight two specifically. The first being that tech sector companies and the government and research labs are all working through these issues, sometimes under different definitions of what is AI ethics, like what does that entail? What does AI safety mean? What do AI biases include? And so I think that is a significant hurdle to developing standards and norms around all emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence. Additionally, if you set a red line that's too broad, it still gives tech companies and it still gives governments a lot of room to push the limits and to still come up with ways that to use technologies inappropriately, but still fall in this box that you've given them. But if you set red lines too narrow, if you set standards too narrow, it's likely that those standards will become obsolete in a short matter of time as these technologies continue to rapidly develop. And that's not to say that we should just like throw up our hands and just be like, well, that's it. Because when it comes to our governments and our militaries and our police departments using these technologies, we should hold them to the highest standards. But there's a lot of nuance in this debate between balancing both collective security and individual freedoms and this process of drawing red lines.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Femi, any final comments or?
I watched a short clip on YouTube called Slaughterbots. I don't know how many people have seen it. I was scared, seriously. You see a group of drones, very small, so many of them like swarm bots, and they were sent to kill some group of students, and in 12 universities, 8,300 of them, because of their political, because they were exposing those at the top and posting everything on social media. And when you see it, you get really scared. That the processor could process 100 times faster than humans, and each of the bots carried 3 grams of explosive. Once it sticks to your forehead, it's able to locate, identify, and kill the target. How? It sticks to your forehead, and the explosive just explodes, and everything inside your head, since that's where things come from. For me personally, seriously, I want to join the call support the call for banning of these
protest, yeah.
Yes, to prohibit the use of lethal autonomous weapon systems. Because the rate at which technology is going, the truth is that the level of autonomy of these weapons will continue to increase. And if care's not taken, we might get to the point where we lose control over the use of these weapons. And I don't think we would like it to, nobody would like to get there.
Yeah. Lydia?
I think maybe it's a good way to end to talk about the safe deployment of these technologies. I think that one of the things that we can do is make sure that we have diversity in the team of people who create these technologies, because that way we know that there's going to be different minds that are thinking about the problem from different ways, and we have a better chance at having a technology that's a bit more robust. Another thing that we need to think about is our own ethics and values and how we can embed them in the technology, in the code that we create. And one of the best ways to start doing them is define our values. And I really like the book Artificial Intelligence because it provides a framework on how we can sit down and actually think about our values. How many of you have thought about what your values are? And how many of you have written them down? And I think that this exercise in itself is also very helpful. And so besides that, also include, particularly when we're thinking about weapon systems, embed in human rights inside the code and the law of armed conflict, those rules. So.
Sure, thanks. And Cenk, any final comments?
Yeah, just so I think my final remarks would be for even that would be consistent with any panel that we heard. I think what we need for healthy society and technology adoption is like efficient human-machine collaboration. I think this is the key. I think the secret sauce for autonomous weapons, replace the job automation and everything. I think humans should focus on what they do best, and machines should focus on what they do best. Robots or AI, use whatever terminology you want. But at the end, we need the optimal collaboration, actually among human, machine, and data. And I think that would also give a good framework to assess the opportunities and challenges in the national security field and defense field, also in other areas that would impact the society and the stability. So.
Sure. Good. So we'll go back to the dance now. And guys, I would like to ask as the panelists to clap the audience itself. And thank you so much for being with us. I know that we have a full agenda later on.